What happens when the courthouse clerk who loves talking down to people finally picks the wrong woman, only to learn she's insulting the judge? The first thing you hear in a courthouse early in the morning isn't what most people expect. It's not shouting, not doors slamming, not lawyers arguing over paperwork. It's the footsteps, slow, steady, the kind that echo off tile floors in a way that makes everyone instantly aware of who just walked in. That morning in Toledo, Ohio, those footsteps belonged to Danielle Porter, though nobody around her had any reason to think she was anything more than another face passing through metal detectors. She walked in with a folder tucked under her arm, a coffee sleeve pinched between her fingers, and a look on her face that said she was already thinking 3 steps ahead. Not in a dramatic way, just in the quiet, practical way people move when they know they have a full day waiting for them. But the moment she stepped past security, she felt people glance her way. You know that stare that doesn't last long but says just a little too much? That silent measuring up people do when they think they can guess your story before you ever open your mouth? Danielle felt that. She didn't react. She never did. She simply adjusted her blazer and kept walking toward the clerk's desk. The courthouse had that early morning smell: coffee, floor cleaner, old paper, and the hall buzzed lightly as attorneys shuffled around, flipping through files, preparing to argue cases that would shape the rest of someone's year or life. Danielle's phone buzzed in her pocket. She checked the message. Another reminder from Judge Levine's office confirming the schedule for the day. She'd be stepping in for him while he attended a judicial conference. It wasn't her first time subbing, but it still felt surreal. All those years of studying, grinding, being doubted, proving herself again and again. And now she was the person everyone stood for when she entered the room. She took a breath, steady and focused. Then she noticed the line at the clerk's counter, stretching almost to the hallway. People looked tired, frustrated, restless. A man in a work uniform muttered under his breath while clutching a citation. A young woman in a hoodie kept wringing her hands. A couple whispered harshly to each other about a court date mix-up. Danielle didn't cut the line. She stepped off to the side, close enough to make eye contact with the clerk when the moment came, but far enough not to interrupt anyone who'd been waiting. She offered a polite smile. The clerk, an older woman with silver-streaked hair pulled into a tight twist, never returned it. Instead, she glanced up with a face that carried sharp lines, not just from age, but from years of judging people before they even spoke. Her nameplate read, Marilyn Keaton, Senior Court Clerk. Danielle cleared her throat softly. Ms. Keaton, good morning, I just need... Marilyn lifted one eyebrow in a slow arc, the way someone does when they've already decided you're an inconvenience. You need what? She asked, stretching the word as if it were heavy. Danielle kept her voice polite, steady. I need to access the chamber's hallway. I'm filling in for Judge Levine today. Marilyn let out a small, dry laugh. Not loud, but loud enough for the people next to the counter to look. A couple of them exchanged glances. One smirked. You're filling in for the judge? Marilyn repeated. Right, sure you are. Danielle waited. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She just watched Marilyn check her over from head to toe, as if she were inspecting someone sneaking into a restricted area instead of someone preparing to run an entire courtroom. Marilyn tapped her fingernails on the counter. Well, we don't just let anyone stroll wherever they want. People try things in here all the time. You're going to need to wait in line like everyone else. Danielle opened her mouth to respond, but Marilyn leaned forward slightly. And if you're lost, she added, the public defender's office is downstairs. Danielle's fingers tightened around her coffee cup, not enough to show anger, just enough to steady herself. She inhaled slowly. There was no point in responding yet, not until she figured out what this woman was trying to turn this morning into. But she could already sense it wasn't going to stay small. But she had no idea just how quickly that spark was about to turn into something the entire courthouse would witness. Danielle Porter wasn't someone who walked around expecting special treatment. If anything, she worked twice as hard not to. Growing up on the east side of Toledo, she learned early that people loved making assumptions about you before ever hearing your name. Her mother used to say, make your own doors, because some folks will pretend not to see you standing right in front of theirs. So Danielle made doors, all the way through law school at the University of Michigan, all the way through the long nights as a public defender when her student loans felt like another full-time job, all the way through private practice, where she built a reputation for being the kind of attorney who could walk into a room and steady everyone around her without raising her voice. But even with all she'd accomplished, she still had mornings like this, or someone behind a counter saw nothing but a stereotype wearing a blazer. She wished she could say she didn't care, but she did. Not because she needed praise or recognition, but because she knew how many people walked into courthouses every day already feeling small, feeling judged, feeling like the system wasn't built for them. She had promised herself she would never become another person, making those mornings harder. As she waited beside the line, she checked the time. If she didn't get into chambers soon, she'd be walking into her courtroom late, and nothing undermined authority quicker than lateness. Judge Levine trusted her. She wasn't about to give him a reason to rethink that. A young man in line looked at her nervously, as if he wanted to say something. He finally did. "Hey, you okay?" he asked. Danielle gave a small smile. "I'm all right. Just trying to check in." The man nodded toward Marilyn. "She's been rough on folks all morning. Told that couple over there they filled out the wrong form, then laughed when they walked away. People have been whispering about her for years, but nobody says anything." Danielle kept her voice soft. "Everybody has mornings they wish they could redo." "Yeah," he said, "but she has them every day." Danielle almost laughed, but she stopped herself. She didn't want to feed the bitterness floating around the line. She just wanted to get where she needed to go. Still, she watched Marilyn for a moment. The woman snapped at an elderly man trying to ask a simple question. She spoke sharply to a teenager who couldn't find a case number on a notice, and with each interaction, she made a point of glancing back at Danielle, almost daring her to approach again. Danielle didn't move. She'd learned the power of timing. Some moments called for stepping forward, some called for waiting. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from the bailiff, Thomas Avery. "Everything's set for 9 o'clock. Let me know when you're inside." Danielle exhaled. "Working on it," she typed back. She looked toward the sealed hallway leading to chambers. She'd walked that hallway only twice before, both times as a guest of Judge Levine, never as the person leading the day. But she had earned her spot. Every long night, every closed door, every whispered doubt from colleagues who thought they knew her limits, those were the things that brought her here. Yet here she was, standing in a courthouse she served, treated as if she didn't belong in the building at all. She shifted her folder under her arm and tried again. "Ms. Keaton," she said gently, "I don't want to interrupt, but I do need access to chambers for the morning docket." Marilyn didn't even look up. "Then you can wait like everyone else. I'm not making exceptions. You're not special." Danielle blinked slowly, not because the words hurt, but because of how openly the woman enjoyed saying them. She took another breath, but she didn't know that within minutes, this quiet standoff would turn into something far more public and far more humiliating for the clerk who thought she held all the power. Danielle finally stepped a little closer to the counter when a gap opened in the line. She still wasn't cutting. She just wanted to be within speaking distance when Marilyn had a break. But even that small move made Marilyn's eyes narrow, like she'd been waiting for an excuse. Marilyn planted a hand on her hip. "Ma'am, I said the line starts back there," she called out, loud enough to draw attention from nearly everyone waiting. Danielle kept her voice calm. "I'm not trying to cut. I just need to—" "I don't care what you need," Marilyn snapped. "Get back in line or go downstairs." A murmur ran through the room. Some people stepped aside to watch. A man near the front shifted, clearly uncomfortable. A woman whispered under her breath as if she'd seen this happen before. Danielle tried again. "I'm actually here on court business," Marilyn scoffed. "Court business, please. Everyone in this line has court business. That doesn't give you a free pass." A few chuckles broke out in the back, the kind of laughs people make when they feel awkward but find the tension entertaining. Danielle straightened her blazer. "Ma'am, I promise I'm not trying to skip anyone. Marilyn leaned forward, eyes cold. "Look, I've been doing this job for 22 years. I can spot trouble a mile away." Danielle blinked. "Trouble?" "Yes," Marilyn said, as if the word tasted good. "People wandering around thinking they can talk their way into areas they shouldn't be in." Danielle bit the inside of her cheek. She wasn't angry yet, but she could feel something heavy settling in the room, something every black professional knew too well, the assumption that your presence needs defending. She tried one final time. "I'm not here to cause trouble. I'm here to—" "That's it," Marilyn cut in, slamming her palm on the counter. "If you don't step away, I'll call security. Last warning." The room went completely still. A teenager muttered, "Dang." The older man who'd been scolded earlier looked sympathetic, like he wished he could step in but didn't want his own situation to get worse. Danielle took a slow breath, grounding herself. "Is there a supervisor I can speak with?" Marilyn laughed, a sharp, dismissive sound. "You're looking at her. Now move out of the way before I really make this official." Danielle lowered her voice, choosing her words carefully. "Ma'am, I understand you're following procedure, but I genuinely do have authorization to be—" Marilyn suddenly raised her hand like she was stopping traffic. "Enough! I said what I said, and if you keep talking, I will call security. I don't know why you think you can just walk wherever you like." She gestured broadly toward Danielle's outfit. "Business clothes don't make you important. I see people dress up for court every day. Doesn't change who they are." Danielle felt heat behind her eyes, not tears, but frustration that she tried to swallow with professionalism. Before she could say anything else, a man behind her spoke up. "She told you she's not trying to cut," he said. "She's just asking a question." Marilyn glared at him. "Sir, if you'd like to be removed as well, keep talking." The man shut his mouth instantly. Danielle stood very still. She knew pushing back harder would only confirm whatever story Marilyn had already built in her head. So she stepped back a few inches, not because she was wrong, but because she needed to stay composed. She wasn't going to give Marilyn the satisfaction of losing her temper, but something in the room had shifted. People were watching her differently, curious, guilty, unsure. Some looked embarrassed on her behalf. Some looked entertained. Some looked away entirely. Danielle clenched her jaw softly, not in anger, just in resolve. But what no one realized was that help was already on its way, and the moment it arrived, everything Marilyn thought she knew about Danielle was going to collapse right in front of her audience. The tension in the hallway thickened as more people filtered in for their morning hearings. Shoes scuffed against the floor, voices buzzed low, and that familiar courthouse energy started building. People worried about fines, custody, jobs, records. Everyone was dealing with something heavy, and now they had a front row seat to Marilyn putting on a show. Marilyn didn't just dislike being questioned. She performed her authority like she wanted an audience. And this morning, she had one. Danielle stood still, holding her folder at her side, waiting for a moment to try, one more time, to handle things politely. But Marilyn wasn't finished. "Ma'am," Marilyn called out again, her voice slicing through the hallway, "I need you to step away from my counter. You're holding up the line." Danielle blinked. "I'm not even in the line." "That's the problem," Marilyn said, cutting her off loudly. "You're hovering. It makes people uncomfortable." "People uncomfortable?" Danielle stared at her for a breath, unsure if Marilyn understood how ironic that sounded. The folks around them sure did. Several exchanged awkward looks. A woman near the back whispered to her companion, "She's really talking to her like that?" The man with her shook his head. "Looks like it." Danielle tried to stay level. Her voice stayed smooth, deliberate. "I'm simply waiting for a moment when you're free so I can speak with you." "Well, you're not going to," Marilyn snapped, "because I already told you. You go downstairs. End of story." Danielle took a breath. "Ma'am, I'm filling in for—" Marilyn held up a finger and waved it dismissively. "Stop. Stop right there. I don't want to hear any more stories. People lie all the time to get into restricted areas." Danielle swallowed the words she wanted to say. She wasn't being dramatic. She wasn't trying to start anything. But she could feel her patience thinning in a way she didn't enjoy. She'd fought too hard to carry herself with dignity, only to have someone like Marilyn try to strip it from her in front of a crowd. The young man from earlier stepped forward again. "She's really not bothering anybody," he mumbled to Marilyn. Marilyn turned on him sharply. "Did I ask you?" He looked down, shrinking away. A security guard standing by the entrance caught the exchange. He didn't intervene, but he watched closely now, sensing something wasn't right. Danielle tried again. "Miss Keaton, may I please?" "No," Marilyn barked. "And if you keep talking, I'm calling security right now. Don't test me." Danielle felt her pulse pick up, not from fear, but from the absolute absurdity of the moment. She wasn't raising her voice. She wasn't being rude. She wasn't even asking for anything unusual. All she wanted was access to the hallway where she was supposed to work, but Marilyn wanted control, and she wanted to make an example. "Ma'am," Marilyn continued, "the defendants check in downstairs. That's where you belong." A gasp slipped from the older man in line. Danielle's eyes lifted slowly, settling on Marilyn. "So that's what this is?" she asked quietly. What is?" Marilyn shot back. "You've decided what category I fall under." Marilyn crossed her arms. I don't need to explain myself to you. Danielle nodded once, the slightest motion. Understood. That was the moment, right there. Even the people who'd been trying not to stare couldn't pretend anymore. There's something about watching someone stay calm while another person keeps pushing that makes the whole room feel the tension differently. The security guard took a step closer, unsure whether he needed to step in or just be ready. Marilyn shook her head with a smirk. Honestly, I don't know why you're still standing here. You've been told the same thing 3 times. Go downstairs, or I'll have security escort you myself. Danielle's grip tightened on her folder. She didn't step forward. She didn't back away. She simply waited. Because she knew something Marilyn didn't. She wasn't the one about to be embarrassed. But neither of them realized that the hallway outside Chambers was about to open, and the person walking toward them would shift everything in the blink of an eye. Just as Marilyn opened her mouth to deliver another one of her sharp remarks, a door at the far end of the hallway clicked open. The sound cut cleanly through the tension. Everyone, Danielle, the waiting crowd, even the security guard, turned toward it. Out stepped bailiff Thomas Avery, dressed in full uniform, radio clipped to his shoulder, files tucked under his arm. He was tall, steady, and had the kind of presence that made people straighten their posture without even thinking about it. Officers who knew their job inside and out didn't need to command a room with volume. Thomas was exactly that type. He scanned the hallway, eyes moving quickly over the crowd, before finally landing on Danielle. His entire face shifted. "There you are," he said, heading straight toward her. "I was starting to wonder if you'd gotten stuck." A few people blinked. One woman whispered, "He knows her?" Danielle gave a small, polite smile. "Trying to get through. Ran into a bit of a delay." Thomas looked from her to the counter. "What kind of delay?" Before Danielle could speak, Marilyn cut in sharply. "She's causing a disruption," Marilyn said, pressing her palms against the counter as if bracing herself. "I already told her to go downstairs. She won't listen." Thomas stared at Marilyn like he needed a moment to process what she'd just said. Then he let out a slow exhale. "Downstairs? For what reason?" "For check-in," Marilyn said confidently, as if daring him to challenge her. "Where she belongs." The young man in line muttered something under his breath, shaking his head. Thomas turned back to Danielle, his tone shifting immediately into something respectful. "Judge Porter, I apologize for the inconvenience. Chambers is prepped, and the docket is waiting whenever you're ready." Silence. Then a ripple moved through the hallway, not of whispers, but of shock hitting people at different times. Judge Porter, Judge Porter. The woman standing in front of Marilyn wasn't a defendant. She wasn't lost. She wasn't someone trying to sneak into a restricted area. She was the judge assigned to run the courtroom that morning. Marilyn's expression cracked. For a split second, her confusion slipped through her mask. "Judge Porter?" she repeated as if the words didn't fit in her mouth. Thomas gave her a tight nod. "Yes, Judge Porter, filling in for Judge Levine today." Marilyn's hand drifted toward her nameplate, like she needed something to hold on to. Danielle didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She didn't throw back any of the insults she'd patiently absorbed. She simply stood there, calm as ever, watching Marilyn's world tilt. I didn't... Marilyn stammered. She didn't say she was a judge. Danielle answered quietly. "I tried." The room felt like it had stopped breathing. Even the security guard who'd been stepping forward paused mid-stride, blinking hard. Thomas gestured gently toward the hallway. "Judge Porter, Chambers is ready when you are." Danielle nodded once. "Thank you." When she took a step forward, the crowd parted instinctively. Some people lowered their eyes, embarrassed for having laughed earlier. Others stared at her with a mix of admiration and guilt. She carried herself with the kind of calm that came from years of swallowing disrespect without letting it consume her. But just before she reached the hallway entrance, Marilyn's voice trembled behind her. "Judge Porter, I didn't realize." Danielle paused, turning slightly, not enough to face her fully, but enough to acknowledge her. "I understand," she said, "but how you treat people shouldn't depend on who you think they are." Marilyn's mouth opened, but no words came out. Thomas stepped beside Danielle, ready to escort her the rest of the way. The hallway door swung open in front of them. But the consequences of this encounter were only beginning to surface, and once Judge Porter took the bench, Marilyn would learn just how public accountability could become. The hallway leading to chambers was quieter than the lobby, almost eerily so compared to the tension she'd just walked through. Thomas walked a half step behind Danielle, not because she needed protection, but because he understood the significance of the moment. He'd seen plenty of courthouse drama, but what happened out there, that was different. Once inside chambers, Danielle set her folder on the desk, took off her coat, and let out a long breath. Not shaky, just one of those breaths people take when they finally have a moment to themselves after holding everything together. Thomas waited respectfully by the door. "You all right?" he asked. Danielle smoothed her sleeves. "I'm fine." "Really?" She finally looked up at him. "I've had worse mornings." Thomas nodded, though his expression said he didn't like it. "Still shouldn't happen. Not in this building." Danielle didn't respond to that. She picked up the docket, flipping through case summaries, familiarizing herself with the names and charges she'd be addressing in the next few hours. She could feel the weight of the day settling on her shoulders, not in a burdensome way, but in the way a judge must feel when they know real people's futures sit in the balance. A soft knock at the door made Thomas glance back. 2 minutes, another clerk announced, avoiding eye contact as she hurried off. Word had clearly spread. Danielle straightened her blazer again. "Let's begin." Thomas opened the side door leading directly into the courtroom. The moment Danielle stepped through, the atmosphere shifted. People quieted instantly. Attorneys stood. Defendants looked up. Even those who didn't know her felt the difference the second she entered. She crossed to the bench with calm, measured steps and took her seat. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the room. "You may be seated." The shuffle of movement settled quickly. Courtrooms had a strange kind of energy, equal parts tension and hope. People sat there wondering if today would bring relief or make their lives harder. Danielle never forgot that feeling. She scanned the room and recognized a few faces from the hallway. They looked at her now with wide eyes, some apologetic, some mesmerized that a woman who'd been talked down to so harshly was now the person with the gavel. And then she noticed her, Marilyn. She stood stiffly off to the side near the clerk's desk, her cheeks pale, her fingers trembling just slightly as she fumbled with paperwork. She didn't say a word, didn't look up, didn't breathe too loudly. She was trying to shrink, to become invisible, but the irony was painful. There was nowhere in that room she could hide. Danielle kept her voice steady. "Let's call the first case." But before Marilyn could speak, another clerk hurried over and read the name instead. Marilyn stepped back, flustered, watching her roll get pulled right out of her hands. The courtroom flowed through its first few cases. Danielle was firm, but fair, thoughtful, but efficient. It was obvious to anyone paying attention that she was exactly where she belonged. At one point, the young man from the hallway entered with his attorney. He caught sight of Danielle behind the bench and blinked hard as if this morning's events were replaying in his head. She nodded at him once before turning her attention back to the case file. Then it happened. A moment she hadn't planned for. The prosecutor asked for a particular form from the clerk's desk. The assistant clerk whispered something to Marilyn, who didn't respond. She simply kept staring at the desk, as if the papers might magically organize themselves. Danielle watched the struggle quietly before speaking. "Ms. Keaton," she said. Marilyn jolted, her eyes snapping up, trapped, cornered, exposed. "Yes, Your Honor?" "I believe the prosecutor is waiting." A few heads turned. A couple of people in the gallery shifted in their seats. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was enough to make every person in that room recognize what was unfolding. Marilyn scrambled through the stack, nearly dropping the forms in the process. Her hands shook so badly, she had to press them lightly against the desk to steady herself. Danielle didn't smile. She didn't enjoy watching her unravel, but she wasn't going to pretend nothing had happened either. "Take your time," Danielle said, not unkindly. "Accuracy matters." The room stayed frozen in an uncomfortable silence. And when the moment passed, court resumed. But everyone felt the shift, including Marilyn, who finally understood just how deeply she'd misjudged the woman now overseeing her entire workday. But the real reckoning wasn't happening in front of the public. It was brewing beneath the surface, waiting for a moment when the courtroom emptied and the doors finally closed. By the time the morning docket wrapped up, the tension in the room had thinned, but it hadn't disappeared. People filed out quietly, whispering to one another, replaying what they'd witnessed. A few lingered deliberately, the way people do when they know something important is about to happen. The second the last case was adjourned, Danielle set her pen down and looked toward the clerk's desk. Marilyn was gathering papers with stiff, jerky motions, her eyes locked on a single spot in front of her. She didn't look up. Not once. Thomas waited by the bench, reading the room with the same calm intuition he always carried. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. Danielle stood, smoothing out the front of her blazer. "Let's take a brief recess," she said. Thomas opened the side door, and Danielle stepped into chambers. The door shut quietly behind her, leaving Marilyn alone in the echoing room. But silence has a way of forcing people to face the things they'd rather ignore. A few minutes passed before Thomas poked his head back out. "Miss Keaton," he said, his tone neutral, "the judge would like to speak with you." Marilyn hesitated. Her hand hovered above the stack of papers before she finally set them down. She swallowed hard and followed him, her steps slow and uneven. Inside chambers, Danielle stood near the window, looking out at the parking lot below. She didn't turn around until the door clicked shut. "Please, have a seat." Marilyn sat, spine stiff, hands in her lap. She looked smaller than she had an hour ago, like all the power she'd wielded at the counter had evaporated in seconds. Danielle walked over calmly, stopping a few feet away. "I'm not here to embarrass you," she began, "but we need to talk about what happened this morning." Marilyn's lips parted, but no sound came out. "You refused to let me into chambers," Danielle continued. "You raised your voice. You threatened to involve security, and when I tried to explain why I was here, you dismissed me." Marilyn stared at the floor. I didn't know who you were." Danielle held her gaze steady. "That's the issue." Marilyn's throat tightened. "I wasn't trying to be disrespectful. I was following protocol." Danielle folded her arms gently, not defensively, just firmly. "Protocol doesn't involve humiliation. It doesn't involve assuming people don't belong. And it doesn't involve treating certain individuals as if they're automatically a problem." Marilyn's eyes flashed with something, shame maybe, or realization. "I didn't mean anything by it." "I believe you didn't think you meant anything by it," Danielle replied softly. "But the impact is the same. You treated me the way you treated that elderly man, that teenager, that young couple. It wasn't just me." Marilyn blinked, startled. "You noticed that?" "I notice everything in this building," Danielle said. "And I know the difference between someone having a tough morning and someone using their position to belittle people." Silence settled again. Marilyn's voice came out tight and uneven. "People lie to me all the time. They argue. They get angry. I have to stay firm." "Firm isn't the same as cruel." The words landed gently but firmly enough to break something inside Marilyn's composure. Her eyes glistened, not in a theatrical way, but in the way someone's face looks when their defenses finally collapse. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I really am. I guess I got used to seeing people a certain way." Danielle let out a slow breath. She wasn't angry anymore, just tired. Not at Marilyn, but at the reality that these moments kept happening. "You have one of the most important jobs in this courthouse," Danielle said. "You're the first face people see. You set the tone. Some folks walk through those doors terrified, some ashamed, some confused. You decide whether they feel seen or dismissed." Marilyn nodded, wiping her cheek quickly. "I understand." "I hope you do," Danielle replied. Her voice softened a little more. "I'm not going to file a complaint today, but this can't happen again. Not with me, not with anyone." Marilyn swallowed hard. "It won't." Danielle stepped back, giving her space. "All right, you can return to the clerk's desk." Marilyn stood, shaky but grounded in a way she hadn't been that morning. She paused at the door. "Judge Porter, thank you for speaking to me privately." Danielle nodded. "Everyone deserves the chance to do better." Marilyn left quietly, her steps slower, her posture humbled. But even as the door closed behind her, Danielle knew the final moment of the story wasn't about punishment. It was about understanding, and the conversation waiting for her on the other side would bring that message full circle. When Marilyn stepped out of chambers, the hallway was almost empty. Most of the morning crowd had gone home, back to work, or back to whatever lives waited for them outside the courthouse. But the air felt different now, less tense, more reflective. Danielle remained inside for a moment, letting the quiet settle. She wasn't someone who enjoyed conflict. She didn't walk around waiting to teach people lessons, but she understood the responsibility of her position. People watched everything a judge said or did, and staying composed, even when someone treated her like she didn't belong, mattered more than most people realized. Thomas knocked lightly on the doorframe. "You handled that well," he said. Danielle gave him a small smile. "Thank you. Not my favorite part of the job." "Maybe not," he said, "but you did it right." She appreciated that. She gathered her notes, tucked them into a folder, and walked back out into the hallway. At the far end, she noticed the young man who had stood up for her earlier. He looked unsure about approaching, but didn't leave. When Danielle saw him, she gave him the same calm, open nod she had offered in the courtroom. He stepped forward. "Your Honor, I'm sorry for earlier. I didn't know—" "You don't need to apologize," Danielle said. He shook his head lightly. "I laughed a little when the clerk was talking to you. I shouldn't have. It didn't feel right even then." Danielle studied him for a moment. He was young, barely 20 maybe, nervous, trying to say something real. "Thank you for saying that," she told him gently. "It means something." He looked relieved and stepped back into the elevator. Just as the doors closed, the older man from the line, the one Marilyn had snapped at earlier, approached Danielle with a slow, steady nod. "Ma'am, Your Honor, I'm glad she knows who you are now." Danielle tilted her head. "Why's that?" "Because people need to see what respect looks like," he said, "and you showed more patience than most of us could have." Danielle felt something warm settle in her chest. She didn't do it for praise, but hearing those words mattered. The man walked off, leaving her alone again in the hallway. She turned toward the clerk's counter. Marilyn was there, quietly organizing folders with movements far gentler than before. She hesitated when she noticed Danielle walking toward her, but didn't step back this time. She stood straight, hands visible, her face open with a mixture of humility and something else, maybe relief. "Judge Porter," Marilyn said softly. "I know you already spoke to me, but I wanted to say this too. I am truly sorry." Danielle nodded. "I hear you." "I didn't treat you the way I should have," Marilyn continued. "But it wasn't just you. I guess I have been carrying things around from home, from work, from everywhere, and I let it spill into how I treat people." "We all have moments where our personal lives bleed into our work," Danielle replied. "But we still have to choose who we want to be in those moments." Marilyn swallowed, the weight of those words settling. "You're right." Danielle rested her hands lightly on the counter, not in accusation, but in understanding. The courthouse is a place where people come already stressed, already scared, some already feeling like the world is against them. If we make them feel smaller, it doesn't help anyone. Marilyn nodded slowly. "I'll do better." Danielle held her gaze for a long moment, then spoke with warmth that softened everything around them. "That's all I'm asking." They stood in the quiet for a beat before Marilyn glanced down at the forms on her desk. "If you have time later today, there's some paperwork for substitute judges that I can get in order. Just let me know." Danielle smiled gently. "I appreciate that." She turned to walk away, heels clicking softly against the tile, and though nothing dramatic happened, no gasps, no applause, the shift was unmistakable. A woman who had once stood ready to confront her had now chosen to listen. A clerk who once used her position as a shield had laid that shield down, and a judge who had been misjudged simply chose grace. But Danielle wasn't finished. She knew that what happened today was an example, not just for the courthouse, but for anyone watching the video of this story, which meant her final words needed to carry weight.